get started with that. We may have some people coming in later from the university.
No problem. Well, I'm Karen. And you know who that is, right? So, thank you for coming. This has been a long time in the making. I think probably Brower and I have maintained about 7 or 8 boxes of archival material about Cap City Jazz Festival, and it was so near and dear to our hearts that we couldn't throw it away. So Bill has kept his in alphabetical order, and mine is a little less. I think my cat slept in it, and a couple of other animals. But nonetheless, we thought it is important enough for us to maintain this record, and we just thank UDC and Judith Corey and the Jazz Archives program for inviting us to share what was probably one of the most wonderful experiences we ever had in producing events. Brower and I have known each other basically since we were younger. We both come out of a movement background. Brower used to come to the SNCC office in Atlanta when I was down there, and he was smart. He always, Jennifer and Freddie can attest to this, that he always had a position paper under his arm, and so we called him Smart Billy Brower. And he's lived up to his name. So how did this all get started? Okay, why don't we start there?
Okay.
So here I am, 41 years old. Reagan was elected as the president in 1981. I was having a wonderful career at the National Urban Coalition working for M. Carl Holman. And among the things that Mr. Holman taught me how to do was to do an event within a month's notice. And one night he called me and he says, Karen, I want you to sit with one of my board members. His name is LeBaron Taylor. And I said, who is he? He said, well, he works for a record company, CBS Records. I said, okay, I'll sit with him. He said, because I want to raise some money doing a concert. And so LeBaron and Mr. Holman, I never called him Carl Holman, but that's Mr. Holman and I met and ate. And LeBaron says, we'll do a concert for you. Who would you like to have out of our stable? And so I had just read the Newsweek magazine about Wynton Marsalis, who was 23 years old at the time. And I said, could we get him? And he said, well, of course. Knowing LeBaron, LeBaron, big guy. So sure enough, he got in touch with probably one of the most creative people within the CBS record dynasty, and that is George Butler, Dr. George Butler. And George came down, spoke with us, and said, yes, we can do this. So he hired Dimensions Unlimited, Bill Washington, remember Bill? And they produced the concert, and I got a chance to kind of tag along behind Bill and his staff to see how it was done. So the concert was called Jazz, 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 and it was done at Constitution Hall. This was probably about 1982, 83, around there. And it had the most incredible lineup of musicians. But in those days, you didn't have 1 or 2 musicians on your bill. You had 10 or 11 musicians. So you had both of the Marsalis brothers. You had Ron Carter. You had McCoy Tyner. If anybody was there, you can remember the rest of them. But it was just, we had 3 hours within the convention center. Within Constitution Hall. And when the program was over, Bill brought the sheet, the cheat sheets to tell us just how much we knew, because the hall was filled. He said, we knew we made some money on this. And Bill just brought this long sheet of expenses. And by the time it was all finished, we made about $5,000.
Bill Washington.
Bill Washington, not Bill Brower. Dimensions Unlimited. So I think I learned a lesson that if we want to try to get something out of the concert series, we need to try to produce it ourselves. So fast forward to Reaganomics. Reagan cut the rug out from under all of the progressive programs that were being funded by the federal government at that time, among those being the National Urban Coalition. So I was laid off. I was the director of programs, and we managed about $10 million in grants, and I was laid off. So I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I thought to myself, I said, we've been talking about economic development and, doing your own business. So why don't I try to do that? So I sat down with a brother named Ron Walker, who played a very pivotal role with the Jazz Festival. He kept all of our funds and managed to keep us out of jail for the years that we were there. And he sat down and said, "You need to start your own thing. You know, if you want to go into producing events, and you need to start your own thing." So I talked to my husband, my dear husband, who always gives me very good advice, A.B. Spellman, and he's yeah, you can clap. And he said, "Yes, Karen, I think that's a great idea." You know. So then he had a conversation with Billy. So I'm going to kick it over to Billy. And I call him Bill. Bill.
I'm Billy in limited circles, but during this period I was doing a lot of things. I was a freelance writer. I was a stagehand, which was really how I was really surviving. And I was also working for Olsen Books and Records at 19 and L. And A.B. was then at A.B. Spellman. And some background on that, I went to Antioch College, 1966, I did my first co-op in Washington. During that, and actually before that, I'd gotten introduced to a book of poetry, a book I think it was called The New American Poetry or something. And there were a few African Americans there, Leroy Jones, before he changed his name and all of that, and A.B. and a few others, kind of associated with the Beats, the Bohemians, the independent writer movement, all of that. So I kind of knew who A.B. Spellman was through that book. And my first co-op here, Gaston Neal, very important person in the cultural landscape of Washington, launched the New School for Afro-American Thought, I think it was called, right at the corner of 14th and maybe V or W, right there. And it's really not important, but A.B. Spellman became real to me through Gaston, and I actually hitchhiked to New York one time, looking for A.B. Spellman. Instead, I found Marion Brown. If you know who Marion Brown is, 27 Cooper Union Square, that was. So these were some long, entangled relationships. I met Karen, as she said, when I was a student at Antioch, and we would go to Atlanta. We didn't go that often, but on one occasion, she was there, and Cleve Sellers was there, and Rap Brown was there, and some other important people in the civil rights and black liberation, and however you want to characterize it, movement. So at least got introduced, rubbed elbows, got introduced, had some feeling for those people. But anyway, A.B. would come into the store and we'd talk, I'd sell him some music, or he'd say, what should I listen to? And I'd identify some things, we'd go back and forth. Oh, microphone. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Got the mic. I'm gonna rock it. No. Okay. So we'd come in and we'd talk about music and buy some things. And one day he started talking about, and mind you, there had already been the Cool Jazz Festival had been, and they'd taken over the whole Kennedy Center. And I'd interned on that. Anxious to get any kind of, I remember the time I came when A.B. was at NEA, and I went over and I said, man, I'm not getting any action. He said, well, you haven't done anything. Perhaps if you would do something might happen for you. And, that really, when you go to someone that you view as like the guy, or one of the guys, and at that point we weren't thinking guys and gals, we were just thinking guys. And they tell you that maybe you should do something if you want to be in this thing. It's real simple, it's real basic, it's real fundamental, and you either do something or you don't. And so, for A.B. to come and say, hey, we're thinking about a festival, the convention center was just coming online. The Metro was right there. this was a festival positioned in the city that the city could own, the African American city could own. And that was very much what our agenda was at the time. It was very important to us. We were playing the music, but we weren't producing the music. We weren't writing about the music. We weren't, yes, there were individuals. So let's not get, because there's always been African Americans in the game of jazz, in the business of jazz, and in the culture of jazz. But if you looked at who was on the stages, there seemed to be a disconnect between that and the rest of what goes on in the business, in the culture, in the whatever, however you want to characterize it. And we very much saw the festival as an initiative to address that in some regard. And I think the musicians that we contracted, many of them felt the same thing. Even if we didn't articulate it, what we were articulating was giving them that feeling, that vibe, that engagement. And I'm not saying that's across the board, but I know many, many of the participating artists picked up on what our desire was and felt that they were a part of that. And so, for
We're improvising.
Straightforward.
We'll throw it back and forth to each other.
Yes, good.
We'll throw it back and forth to each other. So let's go a little bit into the structure. Okay. As we continue our conversation, you'll see that I'm the one who kind of dealt with the nuts and bolts of putting a company together, and Bill was the one who had the artistic vision to produce, to decide upon which concerts would be produced and to contact the musicians. I had to do the bill paying, and Bill did the buying. Does that accurate, Bob?
well, that was definitely true in '85 and '86. 87, we didn't mount anything. '88 was when I got to wear all of the hats.
That's right.
Because Karen was moving nationally. She did Democratic National Convention. I don't know whether, and you know, a thing that comes out of this is all the things, even as the festival came to an end, all the other things that were spawned. So,
Yeah, that's right.
So Black Family Union, Atlas Morgan Day, Taste of DC, World Fest, all of those events were done by the core production team that grew out of Cap City Jazz Festival. Taste of DC went on for like
10 years.
10, 12 years. It kind of ended when the guy was going around shooting people. We actually did the festival the year the guy was doing all the assassinations. That was the last
Bring it back.
festival that I remember. Anyway,
Bring it back.
well, no, you bring it back.
You're too far ahead. You're 20 years after we started. Let's go back to the start. So it's important, though, we acknowledge, especially for those young people who are thinking about maybe I should try to produce my own event, start my own event, that you recognize that it's a very difficult process, but it's not one that's impossible for you to do. But you have to be able to count on certain resources that exist in the community to get started. Now, we had no money, okay? We had zero money. I think I had $6,000 in savings, which eventually went to Cap City. But other than that, we started out with nothing. So the first thing we did was to get ourselves incorporated and to get our 501c3 status so that we would be a company or an organization that could be donated to, and the person who donated could get a tax deduction. So we went to the Lawyers for the Arts, Washington Lawyers for the Arts, and they were excited about the idea. As Bill mentioned earlier, the Cool Jazz Festival had come but it had failed because George Wein decided he couldn't make enough money out of DC, so he wasn't going to do it there anymore at the Kennedy Center. Now, everybody knows the Kennedy Center is the most expensive venue in the whole world, so that might have been one reason why he wasn't able to make the money that he wanted. But nonetheless, we had a void. So here come, the 30-some and the 40-some person saying, we're going to fill that void. And because we had somebody's name recognition, like my husband saying, okay, this is A.B. Spellman's wife, and I'll say that did help a lot, that people began to pay attention to what we were trying to do. So the fundraising aspect was extremely interesting because we did a lot of begging, and we succeeded in getting, this was in 1984, funding from the National Endowment for the Arts for the first year festival, which was unheard of. We also, because Marion Barry was the mayor, Marion Barry freed up a whole lot of resources for us that we would never, ever have been able to have had it not been for Marion wanting to see this happen. And when we told him about CBS Records and said, LeBaron Taylor, and dropped names like George Butler, he said, oh yeah, we need to have that here. So he made some things happen. Specifically, he talked to Peggy Cooper Capris. And Peggy was doing, maybe she was the head of the Arts Commission or was on the board, but she was the plate. Peggy had a lot of clout in Washington, D.C., and we certainly are going to miss her. But Peggy coughed up 25 grand. Then I went to my old boss, who I used to work at UPO when I first got out of college, as a lot of us did, Jim Gibson, who was the head of the Meyer Foundation. And Jim Gibson said, well, we'll cough up $5,000 for you. So we got, bit by bit, we pieced it together. But the real money came when a lady named Jeannie Clark Harris, who ran JAM Incorporated. Anybody remember JAM? Oh yeah, okay. And she was the head of an advertising agency called JAM, and JAM was had also employed Effie Barry as one of its account managers. So Effie and Marion all talk, so Effie says, well, Karen, why don't you consider coming over and talking to JAM? So I said, cool. So I talked to Jeannie, and Jeannie said, well, I have the perfect sponsor for you. And we said, well, who is it? Because we wanted to get a corporate sponsor. During those days, corporate sponsorship was very, very key to all jazz festivals. And she says, it's Coors Beer. Now here we are, the Black Arts Empowerment people, and, coming to do our thing and making sure we make our statement. And somehow the contradiction was really difficult for us to consider. However, Jeannie made it really easy for her. She said, look, I'll do your program booklet, I'll produce, I'll talk to Marion, I'll help you get everything you need if you'll only take some money from Coors Beer. So we did. We took the money, and unfortunately, well, I won't say that. But we did it with a great deal of remorse because we really did not want to do it, but it was the only thing we could do, so we needed that money bad. So we kind of sacrificed ourselves and did that. You want to tell the story about?
Yeah, one thing we wanted to do was the concert, the Max Roach and Boom World Saxophone Concert. The intention was to do in Boom and Sweet Honey in the Rock. I had seen in Boom and World Saxophone Quartet perform together as an integrated ensemble and separately at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And so I'd seen that and, said, oh, well, we're going to one-up that and put them with a vocal/percussion female ensemble, black female ensemble, except they had principal. And Bernice Reagan wouldn't do it. Said, so that's how we ended up. We defaulted to In Boom and the World Saxophone Quartet. And they didn't agree to perform together. But they did perform in, that's the story behind that. And I think even, don't you have some story about that, Rusty?
Yeah, Rusty got a story about that, about Coors Beer. He says he doesn't remember, so I'll tell it. So when we started pushing our advertising around and Coors Beer was listed among our sponsors, I got a call from Roy. I got a call from Rusty. And Rusty said, Karen, you're taking money from Coors Beer and blah, 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 and you know what they do? I said, yeah, I know. He says, as a matter of fact, he says, if you keep taking this money from Coors, we're going to throw up a picket line around here and tell everybody to go home because this is a Coors Beer sponsor. I said, Rusty, please. please don't do that.
My life divided. At that time, there was a nationwide boycott against Coors because of a strike in Colorado.
Right.
And it was both anti-union, beer company. All the other companies were organized, so it was a national movement against Coors in the labor movement. Yeah.
So, I mean, we understand, and we could, some other examples of when we want to do something, the price that you are made to pay. I mean, that's a decision that is moral, ethical decision. And you have to decide what you're going to do or just, have blinders on or whatever the case may be. But that's sometimes the cost. And when we look in the magazines and we see, at some point, maybe not now, who was supporting the music, it was cigarettes and alcohol. So if you wanted sponsorship, you have to get in bed with those things. And you can, I don't know how you twist your mind not to realize what you're doing, but that's what you have to do. So the other thing about 1985 is that we did Miles Davis.
Yeah, we did Miles.
We did Miles Davis.
Miles did us.
With all the other things. And the thing about it is I wasn't at the press conference.
Let me tell the story. This is my story.
Okay.
Miles is my story. You can talk about what you didn't know, but let me tell you how Miles got to us because CBS had brought him out of retirement, so to speak. He was renovated. This was the renovated Miles back in 1984. He was clean. He was very zen. He was painting. His psychiatrist had him painting to bring out his true feelings. So Miles was a very mellow brother. And this was his 40th anniversary in the business. And so CBS Records put a lot of resources behind celebrating Miles the particular year that we came about. So George Butler was Miles's, I'll say he was his contact person within the CBS Records. He was very close to George. Miles and George were very close, and Miles trusted him. So George proposed to us that we consider doing a special program for Miles. And he also said, look, Karen, he's got an exhibit of paintings. He has like 14, 15 paintings that he's traveled around the world. And I can make those paintings come to you if you can exhibit them. And he says, and we'll do a big, Miles will be on his best behavior, and you'll just love him. So please consider this. And hey, you don't have to beg hard, because everyone in the universe who knows anything about jazz loves Miles Davis. So we were fortunate in getting a newer, renovated model of Miles Davis to come to Cap City Jazz Festival. And I'll give you an example of just how nice this man was now. When I first came to the hotel to greet him, George says, well, he's up in his room. Come on, I'll take you up to meet him. And so we went into his suite because we had laid it out well for him at the Longtime Plaza Hotel, which was our hotel sponsor. And Miles had his beautiful outfit hanging up on the door of his bedroom. It was all glittery brown and gold, and you'll see a couple of photos of that in our presentation. And George says, Miles, this is Mrs. Spellman. She's the head of the, and he says, you're the head? And I said, well, you know, there's several of us that are working on this, but yeah, I think I'm probably called, you know, the head. So he says, well, come and sit down. And so I said, oh, no, I don't want to sit. He says, I can't sit down because my mother always told me never to stand in the presence of a lady. Never to sit in the presence of a lady. And you know that just knocked me out. He had me in his fingers after that. So we sat down and we had a conversation, and then later on that day, we did a press conference.
Yes.
Anybody was anybody there at that press
Yeah, I
conference? You were there?
remember very well.
Okay.
Very well.
So
He was
you
really nice.
Go ahead.
When he, I don't know if your memory is, when he came in, you know, so he goes to the podium and he's ready for questions, and everybody is scared, like, you know, like grand jury witnesses. Nobody wants to say anything, and Miles said, nobody wants to ask me any questions. And Carlos Guevara, who worked with, was it called Jazz? What was it called back then? Radio Free Jazz? Anyway, he asked the first question, and Miles was, you know, he took his time and answered the question. He said, do you understand what I'm saying? And I think those who were, well, even people who were not in, quote, the press were, it looks like Miles Davis. You know? and it even happened after the press conference. I took the program, the concert program, and, you know, like, Mr. Davis, would you sign, autograph? And I'm ready for, who knows what's going to happen. And he said, sure, and he drew like a stick figure with a trumpet tip Miles. And he says, do you like this? You know? So I kind of felt like Public Enemy was later was like, don't believe the hype. But you could feel, like you said, that more affable, and, you know, he's like, well,
He was so cool
yeah.
because he saw black people running this festival.
I told
And,
people what happened, they didn't believe me.
yeah.
They're like, you like
Do you remember the actual concert?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Billy was able to get a young couple that lived in Baltimore, I guess, to, this was Miles's birthday. No, it was his 40th anniversary, it wasn't his birthday. So they built this great big cake, which was about as big as this 6-foot table here. And after he played, they rolled it out on the stage. And Miles was so shocked and surprised, and they started cutting the cake. So Miles went over, he took a piece of cake in very dramatic flourish, and he went, and he offered it to somebody sitting in the front row. And then he walked over and he went and got another piece, and then he gave another piece out. So he must have handed about 10 pieces of cake out to the audience, and you know, people just fell all over themselves for that. So the place was full. We made some money that night, and I think that was probably one of the greatest performances that he had. Billy missed it because he was dealing with some kind of technical problems.
Yeah. I didn't hear one note. Didn't get to the press conference. Didn't, you know. I heard that people were actually.
Oh, right. People were actually like walking out because he played so much. You know, and that's the opposite, you know, like, is he going to play, is he not going to play, is he going to turn his back, not turn his back? Well, you know, all of that stuff that people talk about. But apparently that night, he really gave of himself, and maybe during that period, he was doing that.
And he was also with his wife. That's the other thing we need to mention. Cecily Tyson came with him, and George said that he tended to act in a better, you know, he was in a better frame of mind when Cecily was there. So we have to thank her for it as well. And they were both very gracious people, and I think I'll never forget. I think that's probably one of the highlights of my whole event production career was working with Miles Davis.
So, you know, as Karen was talking, I was kind of cycling through some of the images that were taken at the festival during those years. And there's no way that we could kind of organize a proper display of the material. In what we're turning over to UDC, there are, you know, 2 or 3 envelopes with negatives, proof sheets, and images that are already developed. And I'm quite sure that there are more photographers. You know, so representing what you've seen, Roy Lewis, I'm sure many of us know Roy Lewis, Michael Wilderman, who is probably the best friend, the best photographer friend that we had at the time. Ron Brown. I'm not sure who Ron Brown or Pearl Photography was, but they did some great images. That is Philly Joe Jones. I mean, this is an audience that's supposed to know that's Philly Joe Jones. So that year we did Damaronia. And we'd already done Howard University Jazz Repertory Ensemble had already done a Billy Eckstine concert, but the Eckstine music they did were the Tad Dameron arrangements, compositions arrangements for the Eckstine Orchestra that he did for them. So a lot of what we did in this concert replicated that. And what we used Damaronia, which was I think a 9-piece ensemble that Philly had that was dedicated to the music, and then that was like one half of the show. Then the second half was a full big band, which was the Howard University Jazz Repertory Orchestra, which augmented that. And that were musicians in the military bands, other professional musicians in the community. Somewhere there is, I think that's it. There we go. That would be Roger Buck Hill. And this is a Roy Lewis photograph, and that's Buck on the end. Just to kind of cover this, this is a Wilderman proof sheet. Now, who would think this would be worthy of a presentation but me? I somehow think that you would somehow enjoy looking at these little thumbnail pictures, but, that's just, Here we have, and boom, this is a Wilderman photograph, and at that point there were like maybe 9 or 10 people in Boom. Now there's like 5. But that was Max Roach's...
I have a quick story about Roy Brooks. Okay. Roy Brooks was one of the percussionists in Boom. Do most of you know who he is? Okay. Detroit percussionist, awesome, but...
That is Roy Brooks.
Right there.
And Roy Brooks is known for playing strange items as percussive instruments, including toys and trains and things of that nature. Dog, yeah. So, but when Roy came to the program, he's very Afrocentric, I believe, and he came in with a big fro and a beard, and he came walking in, and he was sitting around looking. And I said, "Hi, how you doing?" He said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Karen Spellman, and I'm the concert producer, so we want to welcome you." And he said, "You're the concert producer?" I said, "Yes." I said, "This is an African-American program series that we're doing, and this is DC, Chocolate City, and yada, yada, yada." He says...
And you're a sister.
And his whole visage just completely dissolved with this really evil, nasty look. And he became the most pleasant person I think that was up there on in Boone. He was so happy to see what we were doing. He and other musicians that followed him, once they understood who we were, what we were doing, what the sacrifices were, because we weren't making any money. Now, let's be clear on this. We worked out of our homes. We didn't have an office. We used our own telephones, our own typewriters. I think we had a computer by that time, but all of this was coming out of our dime, and we were supporting the music. And then we had hundreds of volunteers working with us, people who weren't getting paid, but who believed in the music so much that they gave their time. And there are a couple of people I just need to thank who aren't here tonight. One is Gail Dixon. Gail Dixon is the UDC personnel who ran the auditorium over there. She also, along with Consuela Lacey and Bridget Klein, who had their own ticket business, so they did our box office sales for us. And they volunteered their time to do this. Then we have to mention all of the volunteers from WPFW. WPFW was our co-producer for 3 of the events. Marita Rivera was the general manager at the time, and Bob Tyner was her assistant. And so Bob was the person delegated from WPFW to work with us on Cap City Jazz Festival, and he did a wonderful, wonderful job. And we used a lot of WPFW programmers to introduce concerts, and we worked very closely with WDCU, Edith Smith. She and her staff were extremely, extremely supportive of our work. And we got a lot of advertising. If you look in our program books, you'll see full-page ads from DCU. And we appreciated all of the work that the radio stations, the jazz, we were so fortunate back then. We didn't know how lucky we were to have 2 jazz radio stations working in concert. And so I just think it's important that you know that there's so many people behind the scenes that work on Cap City that no one will ever know. Diane Green, Nathia Lee, Katia Stitt. Yeah, I could go on, Baina Abadi. And I know I'm going to risk not mentioning some people. Is that Baina? Yeah. Oh, girl, hey. So we got some Cap City stories in the audience here, which we're going to get to in a little bit.
Yeah, we would meet every Monday at the Spellman residence. Yeah, we were just, yeah, Shea Spellman. No, we had, you know, I mean, actually it's kind of forward-looking, the way we organized ourselves. Even at that point, we weren't even using computers. Roncom, how many of you remember Roncom? Roncom they had an office on Mass Avenue around the corner from me. And I used them so frequently that I just go in the back office and start faxing stuff and Xeroxing stuff and write down what I had spent. You know, at this point, you know, we had whiteout. Okay? We had whiteout. Okay? The fact that I could fax something somewhere was like a big thing. I hadn't, you know, I personally didn't get to computers till somewhere in the mid-90s. And if we had one then, it wasn't very much in evidence. It was a typewriter-driven thing, and it was labor-intensive. It was meeting-intensive. But when among the things that we're turning over is like, I would call it like a Bible. In other words, every project is a Bible. It would be a 3-ring notebook, and it would have everything in it, the budget, the lineup, the this, the that, and the MoFap. All of those things would be there. And if, you know, we've just translated that way of organizing into a digital domain, and we can cut and paste and slide and all those things, but our minds are kind of working the same way.
The other group of people that volunteered.
Microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. The other group of people who worked with us courageously and intensively was our Cap City Board of Directors. And the Board of Directors, in a way, read like a who's who of Washington, D.C. I'm going to call out as many names as I can remember, Billy, and then, you got them up there?
It's
okay.
right up there.
Could you read them up?
So Karen was president. At this point, when I was vice president and secretary, Robert S. Tyner was treasurer, Jeff Anthony, Keeter Betts, Eileen Tyler Board, Tacoma Station,
Bobby Boyd's wife.
Dr. George Butler, CBS Records, the Honorable John Conyers Jr., Dr. Arthur Dawkins, Howard University Jazz Program, Maurice Eldridge, former school board.
He was the principal at Duke Ellington.
Ellington school principal. Samuel Fogarty was a banker in Washington. Kwasi Holman was another banker in Washington and the son of Carl Holman. Jonathan Katz, he ran the National Association of States Arts Assemblies or some such.
State Arts, yes.
Right, yeah, so that was Jonathan Katz. Linwood Oglesby. Okay.
You can't remember everybody.
Angela Owens, very, very important.
Angela Owens.
She put her property on the line in one of our financial situations.
Yes, Ron Clark's wife,
Right.
Incorporated, and was the editorial director for Channel 4, WSC Television.
John Payton, very important lawyer in Washington at that time. He almost got nominated in the Justice Department to be something or other, but you know, he's one of those that got nominated and was undermined because he had argued some cases in a way that the people found not to be favorable.
But also tell him that he successfully argued against the Bakke case at the Supreme Court. He was the one who won the case against Bakke.
Right.
He was extremely
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, John was
And
serious.
that was your roommate at Antioch, right?
No, John I knew through David Murray. John Payton had been the director of admissions wherever David Murray went to junior college or college or whatever that was in California. So I met John through David, and then we became fast friends. I mean, he was a real serious guy. Ralph Rensler.
He was the Assistant Secretary for Public Services at the Smithsonian and was probably the entry point for most African Americans who work at the Smithsonian now, because when we were doing this, there was nobody working there. I'm telling you, James Early, he was the one who hired James Early as his assistant secretary, assistant secretary, and James later took his place when Ralph died. But Ralph was extremely important to a lot of programming that was done in Washington, D.C. Black Family Reunion, all of the folk, he was one of the founders of the Folk Life Festival, and just an extremely good brother. And he had a little money, and he put it where his mouth was. And he and Reed Tuckson, Dr. Reed Tuckson, I don't know if he's up there on there, but he should be. Reed Tuckson was the commissioner for public health in D.C. at that time, and later went on to become, a big insurance person. But he was extremely devoted to the music. He was a drummer himself. I remember him carrying Roy Haynes' cymbals in the night we did it at the Smithsonian. We had a program, and that was the happiest man in the whole school, because he could carry Roy's. So that's our board. Those are our board people.
So the three other people that we didn't touch on, Dr. Billy Taylor,
Okay.
Glegg Watson was IBM,
IBM.
and Jocelyn Williams was the union guy, AFSCME guy in Washington, whatever they call the Labor Council. He was really big in that.
Washington.
Now, you're probably saying, and you had this great board, and all these wonderful people, how could you possibly have any financial problems? And you had 2 jazz radio stations. They're promoting what you were doing. How did this not work? I don't know. I mean, if we knew what to do, we would still probably be doing it. But for sure, we were under-resourced. Even with all of these impressive people, maybe we weren't asking them for the right things, or maybe they were there some in name only and some in substance only. I can't really sort that out of my brain right now. And should you decide to study this or do something with these materials, maybe somebody can figure that out. But we were certainly resource poor. The reason that I put up this event, because this event, in 1989 we only did one event. And in 1988 was when the event that preceded this was the event we did at the Smithsonian, where we had National Treasures. Now that was based on H.R. 57, which came out of John Connor's office in 1987. And Ralph Rensler made it possible for us to give institutional expression to the sense of Congress expressed in H.R. 57 that jazz was a national treasure. That's the language. And that's what we named the award behind. And I'm not sure whether or not there were NEA Jazz Masters at that time. When did NEA Jazz Masters start? It was already around.
Early 80s.
Early 80s? Well, they weren't doing award programs at that point.
I don't think so.
But they were giving $25,000 a person?
No, not, they weren't giving that much then.
So it evolved to that
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah.
But this was early, and getting the chronology straight, it's early in the game in terms of that kind of, having institution give that recognition. And we can, with the Smithsonian, it's a very curious situation. Okay? And let me just say that the Smithsonian had like about 18 departments we were dealing with. Like on the publication, there was the blue line. They had like steps you go through. I'm like trying to like just get it done. Remember, they're in a big building with people in all these offices. And there's 2 of us. And we're trying to do something that they really, maybe some people in the institution wanted, like a Ralph Rensler, maybe a Dr. John Hassey. You know, Martin Williams was at the first thing. And we go get to the picture, you see Martin Williams in the background. I mean, this is really early in the game when we were pushing the envelope about the recognition for this music. And I'm going to be passionate about it because it's just if I'm not passionate about it, it will be overlooked. You know, if we don't make the point about the things that we did and when we did them, they will be overlooked. So that's why I'm this way about this point. But truly, this was, I think, a cutting edge thing. And John Conyers had a lot of vision. And, you know, recent events notwithstanding, we're all human beings, we all make mistakes, we all got stuff that we would like people not to know about.
Well.
So.
And speaking of Conyers, the other 2 people that we have to recognize out of Conyers' office or out of his Detroit Brain Trust are Cedric Hendricks and his then wife, Kay Pearson, Attorney Kay Pearson. And Kay was our attorney when we had a whole lot of court cases coming against us because we couldn't pay our bills, so we get sued all the time.
Even though we had 2 radio stations and all the problems.
No, that's not, you know, there is a formula that we knew nothing about because this was the first time we had done this kind of work that tells most presenters and most people who present art programs now understand the ratio of previously unticketed funding to ticketed funding. And usually they go into a concert, and I learned this later. I mean, we learned that you can't do it the way we did it. We expected, I think, 75% of our funding to come from ticket sales. That is, there's no way on God's green earth that that's going to happen. But we didn't know it because this is our first time doing this stuff. So, but what we didn't know is that we probably, if we had gone in with a higher amount of funding from government sources, from private sector, and from the corporate sector, say to make it about 60 to 70%, we would have been able to make it and we would have survived. But we didn't know that. Nobody else knew it probably either in our community. So there were a lot of programs and a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses that went by the wayside because we didn't understand the financing of art presenting. And now it's nice to know it now, but I'm retired, so.
No, we were really underfunded. 85, 86, Karen was, paying the bills and really doing the politics of it. And I was doing the content and the production side of it. In 88, I had grown to the point where I was doing all of it.
I was down in Atlanta.
But still not.
I was in Atlanta doing the Democratic National Convention. Okay.
Still not understanding all of it. So we might make a decision like say we have $8,000. And we could either decide to buy ads, say in the Weekender. Because having 2 jazz radio stations wasn't doing it. Because everybody who was on the air thought they should have a free ticket. And frankly, when you start looking at the reports about the radio audiences, sometimes the audience wasn't that big. So you can be on the radio, ain't nobody listening, what difference does it make? But what you gotta understand is that for every 10 people that know about something, 1 person's going to come, or maybe a half a person. So we were making decisions about buying travel tickets in advance versus buying advertisements. and we couldn't do both. And probably I might not have consulted enough people, or whatever the case may be. We were underfunded. And the amount of what we thought was having a big impact in the market was having a marginal impact. So those are lessons that hopefully festivals that you come along behind, they know more, maybe they're not doing it at 27 or 32, they're doing it at whatever age, and they just have more experience and make better decisions. But there's a lot of sort of cognitive dissonance when you really examine what happened with this festival.
But another thing that we didn't know is that we were so excited about being able to have access and put these amazing musicians on concert that we stacked the concerts. I mean, our first night we had in Boom, we had Dirty Dozen, and we had how did it go? We had about six artists in one. No, 3 sets of artists in one program slot. So from 8 to 10, we'd have 3 different groups in there, and it was we had to pay for all of them. These were top flight musicians, and a lot of them wanted cash when they performed. And we got a couple of stories about the cash people. Now those of you, there's some people in here who have hired artists to perform, and you have a contract, and you have a tech writer, and usually the contract specifies, well, Miles' contract tech writer specified that he needed sushi in his dressing room. But most of them require 50% deposit down, and then your contract becomes good, and they show up. And here's where this stuff gets dicey. Now, if the contract doesn't specify that they want cash payment, we would have checks cut ready to pay the 50% difference. So that worked in about, I'd say, 70% of the musicians, but there were a couple of them that it didn't work so well for. So one of those is Sister Betty Carter. Betty Carter did not play.
She did, that's right.
Let me tell you, she'd probably been burned so many times before. She was not going to set foot on that stage unless she had all of her money in cash before she went on. Now, she didn't come telling us that, so we had our little check. She said, no. So she said, well, don't you have a box office, honey? I said, yeah, we do. She said, well, let's go to the box office. So this is the truth. So she and I walked to the box office, and fortunately, my girls were sitting in the box office, Gail Dixon, Consuela Daisy, and Richard Klein. And they were just handling the money because they did all of the box offices for the Warner, for the Lincoln, for all of the theaters downtown. They worked at the Kennedy Center box office, so they knew their stuff. So they saw us coming, so they got their stuff together. They said, yes, how can we help you, Miss Spellman? And I said, well, Miss Carter would like to get her remaining, maybe we owe her $4,000 in cash. And so I said, can we accommodate her? And they said, oh, yes, we can. And so they said, sit right down, Miss Carter. So they scooped out all the money from the cash registers that we had for ticket sales there at the convention center, and they counted out the amount that she needed, which was around $3,000 in 10s and 5s and 20s, because our ticket prices were $17.50 a ticket. And we had just enough money to cover her cash payment. So she was very happy, and she kind of, got herself in the mood, and she did a hell of a concert, and she didn't want to get off stage. So, because we had stacked it too tight. I know this now. We stacked it too tight. And so the brother who was the stage manager, T. Brooks knew from her contract writer that she hated to have the color ochre on that flashed on her, when you do the lighting, they tell you, she was very particular about what color she wanted. She said, under no circumstances do you put ochre on me. And so T. Brooks just went and put the ochre on. And she looked around, you can see her, and then she finished up and she got right on up. True story.
If you don't mind, at this point, we have some audio samples of a couple performance things. But what I'd like to play now, or at least a part of, you'll hear Karen and I being interviewed on the radio and how we were thinking at that time. Now this is about 5 minutes. If you start squirming, I'll probably get out of it.
Can I ask you please, so you also recorded some of the concerts?
So what happened in 1988, the USIA, United States Information Agency, actually recorded the concert, all the concerts. And 2 of the audio samples that I have, Jerry Allen and Stanley Cowell, come from that year. One from what we did at Howard University and one from what we did at Lisner. But there was some other audio that we have. This interview was done, seems like 86, at the end of 86, and we're kind of talking about how we do what we do. And so this wasn't, so I have some audio that we generated during the period that people, Andrew, stop it. I don't be messing with you when you be doing your crazy stuff.
News, information, and interviews on arts and culture in the Washington area. Art Talk covers music, museums, theater, education, and careers in the arts. Your host is Joellen Gray County of the University of the District of Columbia.
Good morning. My guests today are Karen Spellman, executive producer of the Capital City Jazz Festival, and W.A. Brower, jazz writer and the festival's associate producer. Karen, Bill, welcome to Art Talk.
Thank you. It's good to be here this morning.
Let's begin by, I guess, telling people exactly what the Capital City Jazz Festival is and when and where it's going to take place.
Okay. The Capital City Jazz Festival is a festival that was founded here in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago to present what we consider to be the best of the jazz musicians available in the country to our Washington jazz audiences. This year's festival will take place on June 5th, 6th, and 7th at the Washington Convention Center, right in the heart of downtown Washington. We'll have 3 glorious days of jazz, as well as a number of other events that support the music. We'll have, for example, a jazz film series that will be sponsored by the Black Film Institute at the University of the District of Columbia. We'll have a jazz photo exhibit that will bring the work of well-known photographer Chuck Stewart here to Washington. We'll have a jazz marketplace, which is really one of the most lively atmospheres around the Jazz Festival, where vendors and record dealers and people who collect and trade and sell and swap different artifacts around their music will be there for 2 days at the Convention Center. And then we'll have 4 concerts and 2 midnight cabarets. So we have a large number of events that are taking place. And the Washington Convention Center is our main host venue for the event.
Okay, I guess this might really be a good time, since we've talked in general terms about some of the things that are going to happen, to talk a little bit about money. Now, I know that, Karen, you're the executive producer and you're the lady who is in charge of the purse strings. And I also have to know that
when everyone beats up on when they can't get who they want for the artist.
I know that Bill is, and I hesitate to say one of those people beating up on you, but certainly one of the people whose primary responsibility is to try to determine who you're going to have at the festival. And before we get into talking about specifics, I think it might be interesting for the audience to learn a little bit about how that process works. So maybe we could talk just a little about how you did this, how you began to conceptualize and how you began to relate who you wanted to see on stage to who you could afford to have on stage. So maybe I'll start with Bill. How did you begin to put together in your mind who you wanted to see on stage for those 3 days?
Well, that's almost like the creative process. You're not always quite sure, but there's certain artists that you think are important that maybe haven't had an opportunity to be presented, or certain combinations of artists that you think fit particularly well together, that have some kind of, can carry out some kind of a theme. For example, last year we did single instrument choirs and used the drum choir, the Boom Percussion Ensemble with the World Saxophone Quartet to accomplish that. This year, to open the festival, we're dealing with an Afro-Latin concept. So we're bringing together Tito Puente and Paquito de Rivera, two artists that reflect both the Puerto Rican and the Cuban heavily African-influenced music that is also jazz. One interesting, for example, last fall I happened to be in New York. I was at McKell's, and Milt Jackson was playing. And between sets I was talking with him, and he was saying, you know, man, little Jimmy Scott is really singing, and I really want to do something with him. And, you know, Milt has a wonderful group with Ray Brown, and so, you know, like a light went in my head. Little Jimmy Scott's like a legend. And, you know, Milt Jackson, Ray Brown, as fine as they are, putting together with Little Jimmy in a performance situation, bingo. And at the same time, we were thinking about doing Betty Carter, and since Betty Carter and Little Jimmy Scott both were with Lionel Hampton together in the late 40s and early 50s, you know, these kind of things kind of run together in your head and you come up with ideas. People suggest things. You see things at other festivals. They come from anywhere. I mean, I don't know. It's like asking someone, where did that particular couplet come from? You know, you wrote it down, but somehow it was in gestation and it comes about. But the creative thing, as far as planning goes, and the money thing, you just have to run on two parallel tracks. You envision what you want to do, and you try to maintain the integrity of that vision within the parameters that your funding will permit. And when you have your battles and you kiss up to makeup or you whatever, you know, you go along and you just do it.
To makeup.
At a certain point, you have to
Do you have a particular theme that you're reaching for or trying to conform to?
Just the highest expression of the music. It's not any particular idiom within jazz. I mean, this year we'll have a South African program. We'll have a program that emphasizes basically vocals and the Afro-Latin thing. It's
Okay, would you like to hear some music
Yes.
that we did? So this is from United States Information Agency. The first piece, Standing Cow, happens to be from my hometown, Toledo, Ohio. I ain't getting nothing for that, okay. I do know the saxophone players. We had with us, and this was a concert entitled A Love Supreme, dedicated to John Coltrane. So we had in the band Gary Thomas. Y'all know Gary Thomas?
Oh, yeah.
Joe Ford. Y'all know Joe Ford? Ray Drummond and Billy Hart's rhythm section. But the other saxophone player, this guy, Mr. Andrew White. You know, I'm often told when you do a presentation and you play the audio, it's too long, people get bored. I mean, I could play the whole thing and y'all could, I don't know if he's even on this song, 'cause I didn't listen to it. Is Andrew in this song?
No.
Is it just a trio version? Okay. So we haven't lost anything, but want to acknowledge the great Andrew White. The next piece I'm going to play happened the following weekend. And just to precede this story, this is one of the hard times. The Friday night we did the concerts at Howard. We did a Friday night and a Saturday night concert. That day, Karen and others were at the bank getting the money that we needed to pay the musicians that night. We got through the weekend at Howard. That Sunday we met
At Shea A.B.
and Karen to figure out what we were going to do. Now this is the year where I'm carrying the cross, so to speak. And, you know, all the artists, you know, I mean, it becomes very personal. You know, if I told Jerry Allen, oh, you've been playing with a trio, but we're going to do you with an octet so we can really hear your arrangements and your compositions. And we were doing Henry Butler, and we were doing, so that next weekend we had to figure out, because we got through that weekend, but we had to cut some stuff to get through the next weekend. In the course of the meeting, I went to the bathroom. And I don't know how long I stayed there, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. But the whole time I was crying. As violent and obsessive a cry as one could have. Maybe like losing a parent or a child. That's how I felt about what we were doing. And the fact that on my watch, it fell down. It was collapsing. It wasn't working. The board, to their credit, were like, no, y'all ain't junking this. We're going to figure this out. They had to figure it out because, you know, I was largely lost. For whatever my contribution was really kind of wiped out. And what we came up with is we did Jerry Allen as a trio. Henry Butler, who later, who became a great friend of the festival, found someone, or some lawyer that he knew, I think it was a Motion Picture Association of America, something like that, to get the money for his performance. The only one who made no effort and who would not compromise and who said, get rid of them and just have me, was Henry Threadgill. So we did the Henry Threadgill Sextet. The other decision that we made was that all of the tech work that we were going to fire all the stage hands. So Jeff Anthony, who had been at the NEA and then retired and gone and worked at BAM and was on the festival board, he had a partner named Vital Fusilier. And he got his partner, and the three of us did all the rest. Now, that week we did lunchtime concerts at Trump Hotel. It wasn't called the Trump Hotel then. What was it called then? The old Post Office Pavilion. We did lunchtime things there. We did other things during the week. So we ran around the whole week, putting up stuff, taking down stuff, moving stuff. And then the final weekend at Lisner, which was full production with the three bands, we did it all. And out of that came the company that I'm now a partner in, You know, out of the three of us banded together, and what I was talking about earlier, Karen later hooked up through Black Family Union on the Smithsonian grounds. We was the three key guys in that. Taste of DC, we was the three key guys in that. World Fest, so Taste of DC was Columbus weekend, World Fest was Memorial Day weekend. We was the key guys. I was doing stages, they was doing sight. We had everything from the FBI to 14th Street. We had all that blocked off, plus some of the feeder streets came in, like 12th Street and all of that. We had all that going on. All of those things, all of those years of production work came out of AASI. Then at some other point, I split off. We did NABOB. We started doing Black Caucus and a whole lot of other stuff. But it goes back to those Monday nights in the Spellman house. She was there. She was at every one of them. She knows.
I just want to say something about, just quickly to tag on something you said earlier concerning African Americans and the music, access to the music, and I'm using that as a broad term. I am, as my first grade teacher, whom I saw earlier today, I am a proud son of Washington, D.C., and a lover of this music. I knew early on the music like tapped me on the shoulder. My parents listened to it. I wondered, even when I was in grade school, how someone who loved words and read liner notes could be in some way close to it. And that never went away. I used to front in front of my boys and pretend like it wasn't no thing. But the work you all did allowed me to do that. You know, you would let me do like artist bios for Cap City, and it's not a small thing. There's no age limit to it. I'm really just, your stories are really, you know, they flesh out what happened in a broad way, and I'm thankful, but I am forever thankful for that, because people think you're being mawkish when you say you need to see people who look like you in positions of responsibility.
Ruben.
I was a grown, you know what, man, and I
how
saw
old-
y'all, and I thank you.
How old were you when you started listening to the music?
Grade school, like second grade, you know.
Okay.
Oh, what voice is like this?
And when you were listening to that music, were you listening to it as music, or were you listening in the affective domain?
Well, all.
So
You know,
that's what I understand about my life, is when Jerry Dean Perkins, who my mother taught in the 6th grade, Jerry Dean Perkins had a family of like 20 kids. And so it was very natural for my mother, as one of her favorite students, to come to our house where there was one child. And one Christmas she showed up with 3 records. Back at the Chicken Shack, Jimmy Smith. Something Else, Cannonball Adderley. And an Art Blakely joint that had Curtis Fuller, Wayne Shorter, Freddie Hubbard, Cedar Walton, Jimmy Merritt, and Art Blakely on it. Had Children of the Night. What's the name of that record?
Mosaic.
Mosaic.
Yeah.
3 favorite records. Because those were the records that introduced me to the music. But what I was being introduced to is the authority of black men in a field. Okay, I was going to Monroe Elementary School. There was nothing black in the books. When they talked about the wars, the this, the that, the other thing, we were not there. The first place I saw us as present was in the music. And I hugged that. I hugged that all through my childhood, into my high school years, through my college years, till I found a way to have a place in it. And then somewhere along the line, I started hearing the music and stopped seeing the people. But it would be a misrepresentation not to understand how important that was.
Amen. Amen. And just to kind of wind down the discussion, or wind up the discussion, talking about the significance of the personal experience all of us have with jazz and music that's made by black musicians. We vowed when we set up Cap City that we were going to do several things. Number one, we were going to find the best musicians in the country that represented the art form, and we were going to do everything that we could to get them on our stage. Number two, we were going to make sure that we represented all of the best jazz musicians and not so good jazz musicians that were here in Washington, D.C. Because a lot of the times the jazz festivals, and New Orleans is a perfect example of it, would import talent and not show the talent that was in our own, that was homegrown talent, that we had beautiful musicians and singers, and we vowed that we weren't going to have that happen. So throughout all of the programming that Billy arranged, we had an influx of musicians from Washington, D.C., and they were first class, just as first class as anybody we brought in from outside. The next thing we wanted to do was to grow the audience. And we tried to do as many things that we could outside of a traditional concert format that would bring people into the music. So we had Miles's art exhibits, so the artists would come and the art lovers would come. We had the jazz marketplace. We did a day of, we did Ellington education all the time. We did, I think, 2, 3, 4 years of programs, concerts, workshops, meet the artists at Ellington, and we're very grateful to Maurice Etheridge, Eldridge, who's no longer with us, and Gail Dixon for making that happen, and also Davey Yarborough. Is Davey in the house? No, he doesn't. So these are some of the things that we kind of pledged to do for ourselves. We didn't sit down and have a seance and say this is what we're going to do. We all had an agreement about the quality of programming that we were going to present, and we didn't want to be second to none. We can hold our jazz festival up to any jazz festival that's been produced all over the world. And most of us have, in this room have seen just about all the jazz festivals there were, and there was nothing better than Capital City Jazz Festival. I can assure you of that.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, I'm not going to argue that point. Let's just hear a little bit of Jerry Allen to get another flavor of what we did, and then maybe we got some more time, but I think it's probably time to have some questions.
I think we need to move on. I think because we're short on time, and I know that there's some folks in the audience that want. There's some stories about Cap City that are in the audience.
With us in the Washington area while she was attending Howard University, and was the
After
first
this,
woman to graduate from their Jazz
2 or 3
Studies
minutes.
program. And with that, I'd like you to give a round of applause again to a very, very talented individual, Miss Jerry Allen, who will be playing along with her trio. And Diane, you can give them a little bit more information about the trio.
We have Jerry Allen on piano, Jaribu Saheed on bass, and Tanny Tabal on drums. Listen and enjoy.
Thank you very much. Good evening. We'd like to dedicate this performance to the memory of the great J.C. Hurd and the great Thomas Kirk.
listening to us for this period of time, and we are donating all of our archives to the UDC Jazz Archives program. All these things here go to this university, which was so important to Cap City when we were organizing and presenting. And it's important that this music gets continued, the tradition gets continued. And so before we say goodbye, or no, we're going to go to Q&A. But I'm going to ask Judith if she would come up and introduce a couple of folks that are really important to helping us make this jazz program work here in Washington.
I'd like you to come up.
Rodney?
And Rodney Trapp.
Rodney, please come up. Please come
Rodney's
up.
our Vice President for Advancement, and Dr. April Massey is the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences.
Could you please come to the front so the folks can see you? And we want to thank you, especially Rodney. I worked with Rodney to make the painting happen, the donation happen here at UDC. And without his help, and Judith was working it as hard as she could, but we made it happen, Rodney. So I just wanted to ask you to say a couple of words.
And I actually will defer to Dean Massey because she actually made it happen, not me. But I want to thank you all for this. This is an incredible program today, and we're so fortunate to have this collection, to be a part of the UDC collection, as well as this artwork. This is one of many pieces that reflect the rich African American heritage that we have, and the display of art. We have a pretty extensive art collection that not many people know about, but UDC has been in the art collecting business for a long time, and we're very happy to have this as part of the collection. And it's also wonderful to hear about the stories about jazz. I actually come from an arts management background, and so, and I came in kind of later on in this journey. We're actually studied arts management, and so some of the trials and tribulations of starting to produce and making decisions about budgeting and marketing and finance and things like that, I had the luxury of actually studying it and not having to figure it out as I go along. So it's really interesting to hear some of the stories about this, but it's been a truly amazing journey, and thank you all for your legacy.
Thank you.
Dean Massey.
Okay, good evening. I just want to thank you all for being here, because I know you could be other places. I'm going to trade microphones with you. So I just want to thank you for being here and for being supportive of not just the music, but of a university, a public institution in the nation's capital that has been an important part of actually keeping the music alive. And a large part of that on this campus has been this person.
Yeah.
But this music is really very personal for me, so I really appreciated your story. So if you just indulge me for 1 minute. Next Friday, if my father were living, he'd be 86. So when I came home from the hospital as an infant, this was the music in my house. And for much of my early life, I rejected this music. And I rejected it because I didn't understand it. But I also knew that when he played it, that the community of men that listened to that music with him transported him outside of my family. And I couldn't fit there. And so I think that it wasn't so much that I didn't understand the music, but I didn't appreciate that it took him to a place very important for him in his development. And I think that as much as the musicians and the lives of the musicians are really important, there are communities of men all around the world who found commonality, opportunity for growth and strength and reinforcement in the little clusters that they developed to on Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays, sat in living rooms, and just played this music until their wives said, stop.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So I think that's a really important part of this. So I think it's really important that the archives is the beneficiary of this most important gift. And I think it's important that it's this archives, because this woman has made it her life's business of keeping the music alive. And so in a couple of weeks we celebrate Big Band Jazz. And it's so important to sit in the back of that auditorium and see musicians and music lovers that cross every generation of living people from Z's to silence. And that's what keeps the music alive. So really important that people have a space that they can come to and they can actually see this so that they can see it up close and that they can touch some of the things, not all of the things, but that it lives. And I think that Judy has been passionate about seeing that UDC is the place where jazz is alive. And so people talk about, oh, UDC, a hidden gem, people don't know. But because of her work internationally, people do know the work. And so I hope that that's not lost on anybody that's here. So I know that it's late and I don't want to go on, but I could go on because I was sitting there and I got very emotional about this because it took me all of the way back. And you just don't know how much you're rooted in something until you sit in the back of a room and you hear people talk about being on the forefront of just moving it, keeping it moving, and allowing people like me, like my father and his friends, to be the beneficiaries of your efforts. So thank you.
I just want an acknowledgement from my colleague, Michael Fitzgerald, who's been working very closely with this. Rusty Hassan, one of our faculty members. And I guess I can announce it this evening. Ruben Jackson is our Jazz Archive Specialist, who will begin May 1st at the Felix E. Grand Jazz Archives. And everyone here, A.B. and Karen, thank you again so much for the painting. We're just thrilled. And of course, for this wonderful presentation and for the Capital City Jazz Festival will be in the Felix E. Grand Jazz Archives. I'm enjoying just transferring those tapes right now. That was just getting up 4 o'clock in the morning, and you all know how it is. But it's a joy. But thank you again, and thank everybody for coming. We really appreciate it. And Big Band Festival, April 30th, International Jazz Day, and also the last day of Jazz Appreciation Month, 8 o'clock in our big auditorium.
Judith, can we have a couple of comments? Because there's some Cap City people in the audience here that I would really like to hear a story or two from. Baina is over here who works so very
take
hard.
the mic so we can do it.
She and Nasser, happy day.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know if I really have a story. There's so many
Could you come
stories.
up so that we can
see you?
Please. And then the camera can capture you as well.
Is this good?
Yeah. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. There are many, many stories. But the best story for me is that I was raised in this idiom of music from infancy. And I didn't know that it was so different to people. My parents were musicians and in the arts, and their friends were, and it was the world. And when people came to town to perform, I thought they lived there. I thought they were my parents' friends. I didn't know, that they were from all over the world. And so it's just been a passion of mine from infancy. I married into it. I gave birth into it. It's just continuing. But the best thing for me with Cap City is it bonded me with some people, these people, and some other extended family who I'm still connected with today, like some of them 40 years later. But I learned so much. I got bit with the production end of things. I'm not a performing artist, but I love them, and I care for them, and I want to take care of them and make sure that they have what they need and they're reflected in the right light. So I was in the learning process with them. I was not much younger, but in the infancy stage of production and working with artists. And so they taught me. Karen has no idea how she mentored me, because there were so many people involved. But to be able to come and sit at her feet, and AB, and the children, and the dog, it's just, the dog is very much a part of all of this. And just sister friends that are so dear to my heart now. And Shatir brought me to Cap City, and Shatir Monroe. And I knew Billy before, but I didn't really know him. I knew of him, but I didn't know him. And that's when I really got to meet him and learn all the dynamics of, all the group dynamics of trying to make something happen. And it was just exciting for me. It's a learning process. It's still with me. I still hope that I reflect what you've taught me over these years and the things that I do and produce. And I'm just so happy to be a part of this national treasure, this legacy of ours. And I hope to be a part of maintaining it because it's critical, it's important, it's our legacy, it's our history. And European classical music, even though some people think it's dying out, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, they celebrate it, they listen to it, they support it. We have to support our own. This is our life. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be the fly on the wall, to listen, to see. And there were inner fightings. I mean, we fought, we did all kinds of stuff, you know. But it's like family. And I still love them. And I think they still love me. And just happy. It's just, the stories are minor compared to the execution of the vision that they had. And I'm just glad to be a part of that. And went on to Black Family Reunion and all the other events, Congressional Black Caucus, you know, all that stuff. And I'm still a part of it. So whatever they're doing, I'm going to be a part of it. Even though we're all retired or whatever, getting older.
We tired, we ain't retired.
That's great.
But just encourage you to continue to support and continue to share with the young ones. Because the babies have to get it. The only way it's going to stay alive is we leaving here. So we've got to give it to the babies and make sure that it stays in the school and in our homes. Later for the media, we got to do it ourselves. So just thank you.
I was actually for the first festival on WAMU, still on Sunday afternoons, as another outlet for the music.
So we had three
Yeah.
outlets. Still didn't get nothing done.
But, you know, one of the things I'm really thankful for was the opportunity to take my teenage daughter, Kendra, to see Miles Davis. And see Miles holding up signs with the names of his musicians, like Kenny Garrett, you know, and telling my daughter Kendra why he was holding up signs in terms of his voice and not wanting to really talk on stage, you know. And that was double goof because everybody's always complaining about Miles not communicating to the audience, and there he was, you know. And the other real special moment for me was you mentioned the Living Legacy Award, you know. At Crampton, I got to present Roy Haynes with the Living Legacy Award, you know, and he wanted to make any comments. He said, "Well, let's play some music, you know. That's how we speak for it, you know." And two very special moments for me. I want to thank you again for the presentation tonight and hear some of the inside stories and how important this festival was, you know, and how the legacy continues. And, you know, I know a lot of lessons were learned for the existing DC Jazz Festival that's ongoing. That you know how to make it function financially is so important. You know, that's.
We had a lot of people that had a whole lot of ideas about the music. Didn't have that many ideas about business. So you know what we learned is you need a division of labor. That when you cover all the disciplines, you need to get something done. You know. AB?
I just want to make one very brief point, and that is that the importance of this story is that of all the art forms in the world, all the serious art forms, none is more dependent on its audience, on its fans, than jazz is. The others, all of them, have institutional support that is enormous. Symphonic music, you have all the orchestras, you have a powerful service organization. It's well organized, and you know they have a lot of financial problems. I won't minimize that, but the thing is, there's an institutional base. Jazz has a very, very small institutional base. It depends entirely for its survival on dedicated people who love it, like these. And if you go all around the country, people organizing jazz festivals, jazz societies, all the archivists, the emerging new jazz museums, etc., they're all done by individuals who just love it and do it simply out of love and are dedicated to keeping it alive and keeping it flourishing. And I think that really has to be appreciated.
I'd just like to acknowledge a couple more people that are here. Cheryl Hawkins from UDC TV, she's been a really, really important part of it. Sudar Satanabu, he's our graphics person for all of the jazz dances and Tony Gittens DC Film Fest is coming up now too, yes, I want to acknowledge that. And if-
Tommy, you out there?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even see you. I saw you.
So talk about
Come on, Tommy.
Right
Let Tony speak, please, because, well,
Like
Tony,
film
tell them what your relationship with Cap City and how it.
I remember you asked me to show films. You asked me to show films, and I remember we hunted and we had like some incredible shows. But the other thing I remember is because you asked me to show films, you also gave me a pass to go see all the shows. I saw some incredible stuff from the front row. And the one I remember clearest for some reason was Yuma Sakila, who I sort of knew as, was he a real musician or was he just playing, this bop, this bam, 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 bam kind of thing. But that's the first time I appreciated him so much. And I remember that clearly. I can remember the scene I was in, the hall I was in. For some reason I remember that clearly. But just one thing about the film festival. So related to this, we're showing a film called How They Got Over, which is about the history of gospel quartets, which is just incredible. And we're bringing in the Howard University Gospel Choir to perform before the screening. And so I think it's going to be a special evening. But I really want to thank Karen and Billy because I was one of those people who watched you guys do what you were doing and did learn from it. I remember speaking with you, Karen, when we were on vacation and where were we?
Virginia Beach. No, Nantucket.
I remember catching you, sometime when the kids were away and chatting with. I remember you sort of understood what I was going through. I did appreciate that.
Karen, I remember you showed me the thank you note from Master Kayla, remember?
Oh, yes, Yellow Gorilla.
Yeah.
Hugh Master Kayla is another, he was so wonderful.
Yeah.
I just got to tell this story. His company is called Yellow Gorilla.
Yellow Gorilla Productions out of England, and he brought his whole group from Botswana and everything, Cape Town, and they performed for us. And of course, they were the #2 story about, well, we don't want a check, we want cash. So what we did, I don't know if you remember this, Billy, but your friend who had that van, we had a brother who donated time. Downtown opened his van up. All of the musicians from Hugh Master Kayla's band got in the van, back of the van. I got in the back of the van. And we had arranged to go get his check cashed at a check cashing place. But the trip over was wild. I think that was one of the most fun times I ever had, was sitting in the back of the van with Hugh Master Kayla's boys, and they just cut up something terrible. We got their little check cash, and they were happy and went on their way. And we got a thank you card. I showed it to Judith. After a couple of weeks afterwards, we got a thank you card from Yellow Gorilla Productions. And each one of the musicians had signed a thank you card for us. So that's one of our treasures that we still have. So, yeah, Hugh Master Kayla is bad. This is a part of his chant. Master Kayla, Master Kayla, Master Kayla is a bad motherfucker, Master Kayla. Master Kayla is
At least I didn't say it.
We'll end it on that.
Yeah, I didn't say that bad word. I got through a public presentation without a profane utterance. Isn't that wonderful?
Still time.
Yeah. No, we're done. We're done. Thank you.